All right, Shabbosai, good morning, or good tavach. It is such a schos Baruch Hashem to be able to begin this last week of Bava Basra. The excitement is palpable. Baruch Hashem, so incredible, so beautiful, so wonderful. Again, we begin by thanking all of our sponsors, to thank our Talmud Torah sponsor for Tav Shin Pei 5785, the Tilsa Mishpacha, for dedicating all the Shumer Drushos this year as a zechus for Besoros Tavos for Am Yisrael. Our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Kislev, Joshua Becker Friedman, and commission of the yard site of Josh's father, Yisrael Yehuda. Better of Chaim Rafal, Zechron Levracha, and the schus for the safe return of our precious hostages and the success and security of our holy soldiers. Semi and Malka Esterson in memory of their parents, Ludwig Stiefel, Yitzchak Leib Ben Aaron Akoin, Sarah Stiefel, Sarah Rachel Bas Baruch Avram, Hinda Esterson, Hinda Bas Henech Ephraim, and in memory of their dear friend, brave soldier, beloved husband and father, Naftali Yonah Shemi Kom Damo, Ben Beatrice Miriam, and Daniel Yigal. Our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Jacob and Julie Blumenfeld, Le'iloi Nishmas, Julie's grandfather, Harav Zechariah, Ben Harav Aryeh Leib, whose yard site is today. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the neshamas have an aliyah, the families, Ein Chama, all of those who need a refuah should have one together with Kol Chol Yisrael, Kodesh Baruch Hu should return our hostages, B'Shalom and B'Karav, and our holy and precious soldiers should be successful, B'Chol Maaseh Yedehem. But with that, let's go. Today's daf is Kuf Ayin Gimel 173, and we are picking up Emiras Hashem mamish on the top of the daf. Ve'ela Hod Disanya. So remember again, at the end of yesterday's daf, we were dealing with a fascinating and a fascinating, riveting discussion about Chashinan L'Nefila. Do we have to be concerned that you have multiple people with the same name, and perhaps again one person, is Reuven ben Yaakov. Reuven ben Yaakov dropped the shtar, and the other Reuven ben Yaakov was able to pick it up. So essentially what the Gemara said is that halacha l'maisa, we're not choshesh for nefila, right? We don't really worry about, we don't really take into account the possibility that someone dropped the shtar and someone else with the same exact name found the shtar. We're not choshesh in nefila, but I just want to point out something absolutely amazing. If you think about this concept of choshesh in nefila, do we have to be concerned that perhaps something fell and was lost? So halacha l'maisa, we're going to see, we paskin, ein chosheshin l'nefila. We're not choshesh that someone's going to drop a shtar and someone else is going to pick it up and find it. But hashkafa l'maisa, we're always chosheshin l'nefila. A yid always has to be concerned about nefila, about falling down, about failing. A person has to be constantly spiritually on guard. Sometimes we become a little bit, say ever have this situation like this where a person, I dealt with a particular avera that I've been struggling with, and then what happens? So then I go ahead and finally I feel like I've mastered it. I feel like I've conquered it. And then what happens? Ultimately, you fall off the wagon with the same Aveira. And you wonder to yourself, how could this have occurred? Mamish, I worked on this so hard. I dealt with this for so long. And yet now, again, I'm right back exactly where I was before. Why? Because in the realm of Ruchnius, there's no such thing as complete security. In the realm of Ruchnius, even if a person is able to manage a certain Yetzer Hara, Chashinan l'nefila. You have to live your life. You have to live your life that I am never above temptation. Every avera is within reach. We'll say the Klal Gadol is, you ever come across like certain lavim in the Torah, and you're like, phew, thank God, I don't have a Yetzer Hara for that one, right? Like Baruch Hashem, it's kind of like Yom Kippur afternoon when they're reading that Kriyas Torah with all the arayas, Baruch Hashem, safe on all of these counts. Safe on. The Klal Gadol is, if the Ribono Shel Olam asred it, it means that we have a taiva for it. You don't need to answer things that people don't have a taiva for. If it's asr, it means there's a taiva, and if there's a taiva, it means given the opportunity, we would do it. And his son, he said, no, come on, that's ridiculous. It's not ridiculous. It's not ridiculous. A person has to be incredibly self-aware about their own human frailties, their own human shortcomings. And if you live life recognizing, I am not beyond temptation for any avera. That, if you live life like that, then I live life with a heightened vigilance. In other words, if I live life essentially with the mantra, Chashinan L'Nefila, I am perpetually scared and nervous about falling down. I am perpetually scared and nervous about failure. Then you live life with your guard up. You live life with a heightened sense of vigilance, and when temptation comes your way, which inevitably it does, I'm ready to meet that challenge. The Gemara says, we should start the Gemara. So the Gemara says, now that we established that at least halacha l'maisa lo chayshina l'nefila, but hashkafa l'maisa chayshina l'nefila, ve'alahad l'sanya kishem shen motzin shtar chov ze al zeh, kach ein motzin al achirim. So we'll say, so here's the problem. We have another brisa, and the brisa contradicts our Mishnah, because what does the brisa say? The same way that if you have two Ruvain ben Yaakov who live in the same city, they cannot go ahead and lend money to one another. They also can't lend money to anyone else. That contradicts our Mishnah. So, my kamiflagi, osios niknos b'mesira kamiflagi. So, we'll say this is fascinating. Now, we've seen this concept of osios niknos b'mesira. We've seen this idea before. Again, beforehand, when we were using this concept was really, the idea was that when you acquire a shtar, the entire transaction, so to speak, drops, is vested, is locked in with the acquisition of the shtar. Here in this context, it still means that, but it also takes on a little bit of a different nuance, which is, do we essentially assume that halacha l'maisa, whoever's holding the shtar, that's the owner of the shtar? No questions asked. In other words, essentially, I would say the way like the marketplace has to work is, if somebody is the one presenting the shtar, we have to assume that they're the owner. And if we start kind of second guessing, well, how did you get it? Where did it come from? Maybe you found it. The ein lo davar sof. So Gemara says, here we go. Tana di dan savra osios niknas b'mesira. So our Tana holds that ultimately, again, osios niknas b'mesira. Look at the Rashbam for just a moment. Tana didan savar lenefila dechalo chayshinan my ikalamemar dilma ihu yavle osios niklos b'mesira the alkarcho yifralo lemisha shtar biado. So our Tana holds, listen, whoever has the shtar, that's the owner. That's the owner. On the other hand, Tana Baras Savar ain't osios niknos b'mesira, but the Tana of the Brisa holds that no, just because you have possession of the shtar does not automatically allow us to assume that you are actually the owner of the shtar. With other possibilities. So we'll say, right, really fascinating idea. So in this case, I just want to point out, even though again in this case, the name of the shtar is my name, right? Remember again, this Reuven ben Yaakov. This is Reuven ben Yaakov, is the malva, is the lender. So lamaisa, again, even though it's the right name, but do we have to be choshesh for ultimately two people with the right name? So the fundamental machlokes is, Tana of our Mishnah holds, whoever's holding the document, that's the owner. That's the owner. Tana of the Brisa says, no, maybe not. So the Gemara says, the possibility is, it's not true. Everyone holds that halacha l'maisa. Whoever's holding the shtar is considered to be the owner of the shtar, because again, the ownership of the shtar is determined by whoever is actually in physical possession of it. V'hacha b'tzarich lahavi raya kamiflagi. Silber says it's interesting. Here's the machlokes. The machlokes is essentially possession of the shtar enough, or do you still in general have to certify your claim with an additional layer of proof? Tana didan savra intzarach lahaviraya. Our Tana of our Mishnah holds that no, possession is enough. You don't need any additional level of certifying proof. The Tana baras savra tzarach lahaviraya. Tana of the Bryce holds no, that you still require some additional raya. So also listen to this. The itmar osios niknos b'mesira. So again, remember again, possession of the shtar essentially certifies ownership. Abayi amar tzarach lahavi raya. Abayi says yes, that is true, but you still need to satisfy an additional layer of proof that indeed this is yours. You have to bring a raya. Rava amar inu tzarach lahavi raya. Rava holds that no, you do not have to bring a raya. Once you have possession of the shtar, that certifies that you are the named party, and halacha l'maisa, that is enough. Amar Abayi says, so Abayi says, from where do I know that even if you have possession of the shtar, you still need another level of certification? This Sanya we learned, Echad min ha'achin shashtar chov yotze mitachas yodo. So listen, this is actually a very interesting case. Sabai is coming along to say that I will say, if you show up in Beis Din and you have the shtar, even though again you're named in the shtar, Abaye says you still need another level of proof to certify your claim. So Abaye says, where do we know this from? So this is actually quite fascinating. Listen to this. Disanya, echa mina achin, shashtar chov yotze mitachas yado. So once you have a brother. So take a look at the Rashbam. It's actually, the Rashbam is right across. Echa min ha'achen sheshtar chov yotzei mitachas yado, o b'shem aviem, o b'shem malva acher, v'toin acher nasnu ali, v'hem omrim ata chatafto. So listen to this. There are a bunch of brothers, right? And one brother goes ahead and he shows up with a collection document. Right now, again, we'll just call the brother Ruvain ben Yaakov. And Ruvain ben Yaakov shows up with a document, a loan document that belonged to his father Yaakov. And now Ruvain's trying to collect on the document. Ruvain says, Dad gave this to me, or the other brothers gave this to me as my right to collect it. The other brothers are claiming that what? What did Ruvain do? He stole it. Right? Stealing is such a strong word. Right? He took it without permission. Right? In other words, he went ahead and he's claiming either Dad gave this to me as my right, or I was given this from the best of my brothers. The brother said, no, you just took it. You just took it. No one gave it to you. So what's the halacha? So the Gemara says, alav lahavi raya. Ultimately, again, the brother, so Ruvain, has to bring a raya that indeed he is entitled to collect this debt. So my love, hu adin lachrini. So Abaye says, what do you see from here? What do you see from here, Bosai? That possession of a loan document by itself doesn't automatically entitle you to collect it. In other words, just because you have it, now obviously possession is a very strong start, but it's not enough. You're going to still have to certify your claim with some additional level of proof of ownership. So the Abaye says, what's true for a brother is true in every other case as well. But Rava says, no. Shiny achin deshamtu mehadadi. Rava says, no. Brothers are different. Why are brothers different? Because it's common for brothers to take stuff from each other. Right? In other words, so again, both in a nice way and a not nice way. In other words, especially when you're dealing with Yerusha, it is common for brothers to take stuff from each other, and therefore, again, the fact that Ruvain has it does not automatically result in proof of his ownership. Okay, Ika da'amri. So therefore Rava will say, Abaye, this is not a good proof to you. An alternate version of this previous discussion, Ika da'amri, Amar Rava, Minat minallah. Rava says, from where do I know that ultimately, again, possession of a document is enough ownership, you don't have to certify your claim additionally. Disanya, because we learned, same case, right? Ruvain ben Yaakov comes and he has a shtar, right? Now remember again, this was a loan that his father Yaakov had made to someone else, and now Ruvain is coming, document in hand, to collect on the loan. Ruvain's claiming again that either his father gave it to him or the brothers gave it to him, and what happens? The other brothers say, no one gave it to you, you took it. So what's the halacha? So Allah of the Haviraya. So ultimately again, Ruvain has to bring a proof that he is indeed entitled to collect this. And now Rava will say, it's only in the case of brothers that Ruvain has to bring proof. Why? Because it's common for brothers to take stuff from each other. But in the case of non-brother case, ultimately again, possession of the document is going to be enough. So I will say, by the way, I just want to point out, this is a really fascinating discussion, right? Machlokes Abaye and Rava over here about when you show up with a document, right? So that I have the document that says that, right, that I'm entitled to collect this debt. Now, by the way, whether I'm named as the lender or not, point is, I have the document. Is possession of the document enough to give me power of collection? Abaye says yes. Abaye says no. You still need to certify your claim with some additional level of proof. And Rava says yes, it's enough. So let's go back to this. Abaye will say no. Even though I hold that halacha l'maisa, you always have to bring an additional layer of proof. The case of the brothers is still necessary. I'll tell you why. Because you would have thought, I would have like this. Because it's common for brothers to take stuff from each other, therefore what? Brothers are going to be even more careful with guarding their stuff from each other. Which means that if Ruvain comes along and Ruvain has the shtar, there's only one way Ruvain got that shtar, and that's how? Either his father gave it to him, or his brothers gave it to him. And therefore, if he's showing up with the shtar, it must be that he's the rightful owner of it, and therefore he shouldn't have to bring a raya, kamash malon, no. Okay. So I will say, fundamental machlokes Abaye and Rava, when you go ahead and you have the shtar, do you need an additional level of certification, an additional layer of proof of ownership? Abaye, yes. Rava, no. Ve'ela hadesanya. Excuse me. First wide line. Ve'ela hadesanya. Kashem shemotzin hein shtarchov al achirim, kach motzin. So we'll say now there's another brayso. Kashem shemotziin hein shtarchov al achirim, kach motziin ze al ze. Now this brayso, again remember this is the brayso of two Ruvain ben Yaakovs who live in the same city. So now this brayso says the same way that they can lend each other money. Ultimately, again, they could also lend other people money. Once again, this contradicts our Mishnah, to which the Gemara says, no. V'kosvin shtar lelova afa pi she'in mal v'imo kamiflagi. So I will say, what's the machlokis over between our Mishnah and the Braysa? It's actually quite fascinating. The machlokis is, I will say, do we write, this is very interesting, do we write a loan document, right, for the borrower, even though the lender is not with him? Now I will say, I want to point out something. Everyone will agree that you can't write a document for the lender if the borrower is not there, right? Why not? Why not? That's a catastrophe waiting to happen. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine if you could show up at the Sofer and say, Sofer, do me a favor, just draft a document that I'm lending Ruvain $1 million, right? And they're like, sure, right? And the witnesses sign it, and it's great. That you can't do that. On the other hand, if a guy shows up and says, listen, I'm borrowing $1 million from Ruvain, okay, I mean, again, who's put at a disadvantage with that? So there's a machlokes. Do you need the lender to be there when the borrower is drafting the document or not? So this is a fascinating machlokes. So watch this. So the Gemara's my kamiflagi, second wide line above say kofain gimel amud aleph 173. But my kamiflagi because finshtar lelova afapi shein mal ve'imo kamiflagi. The machlokes is in the following case: do we write a shtar for a borrower if the lender is not present? Here we go. Tana didan savar. So the Tana of our Mishnah holds kos finshtar lelova ve'afapi shein mal ve'imo. You're allowed to. You're allowed to, right? You can write a document for a borrower, even though the lender is not there. Now, both say, and I understand, there's a danger in that also. Where is there a danger? Listen to this. Zimnin, so both say, so now the danger comes up in a case of where there are two Ruvain ben Yaakovs. Right? So now let's just play this out. So right, Reuven ben Yaakov goes ahead, right? Reuven ben Yaakov goes in and shows up at the Sofer, and what does he say? Listen to this. Zimnin, the Azal Gabe Safra. So Reuven ben Yaakov shows up at the Sofer and he says, right, the Gabe Safra Vesadi, and now there's a scribe and there are witnesses there. V'amr lehu, kasvid ishtara, Diba'ina lemezef mi Yosef ben Shimon, Chaveri. Right? So what happens? So okay, I'll just use the names of the Gemara, right? So Yosef ben Shimon shows up. And he says to the Sofer and to the witnesses, do me a favor, I'm borrowing $1,000 from my friend Yosef ben Shimon. Okay? Now what happens? Now the Sofer goes ahead and writes the document. V'kasvi, right, to Basra the kasvi, v'chasimi. So now what happens? So now the Sofer writes it, he signs it, the witnesses sign on it. So what is Yosef ben Shimon going to do? Right now remember, Yosef ben Shimon ostensibly is doing nothing wrong. What is he doing? He's the borrower. He's the borrower. So he's saying, write for me a document that I am going ahead and borrowing from my friend Yosef ben Shimon. So the Gemara says, now what happens? V'amrlei havli mea diasis minoi. Now, now what could happen? So this is easily exploitable. Now what happens? Yosef ben Shimon has a document that says, I'm borrowing from Yosef ben Shimon. So what is he going to do? He's going to present it as proof that the other Yosef ben Shimon borrowed money from him. So again, if you go ahead now, now remember, this is only a problem if what? This is only a problem if you write a loan document without the lender being present. So the Tana of our Mishnah holds that Allah you're allowed to write a loan document without the lender being present. Well, because of that, therefore again, if you have two Yosef and Shimons in the same town, they can't take out loans ones against the other because it's an easily exploitable situation. On the other hand, Tana Bara, the Tana of our Brayso, holds Ein Kosin Shtar Lelova Ad Shei Mal Ve'imo. The Tana of the author of our Brayso holds that no, you can't write loan documents unless both parties are present. So because both parties are going to be present, even though both of them are named Yosef ben Shimon, we're going to be Mavarer, who is the lender, who is the borrower, and it's not exploitable. Incredible. Incredible. So I'll just point out over here, by the way, just some fascinating halacha lemaisa in these particular cases. So So first of all, the way we paskin with Abaye and Rava is that halacha l'maisa, once you have the shtar, you do not need any additional layers of certification. Now, remember, that being said, if I show up to Beis and I have a shtar that says that, I lent Reuven $1,000 and Reuven owes me $1,000, so remember, Reuven has a right to challenge that document. Reuven could say it's forged, and therefore, again, we're going to need a handpick, right? At Karta, we're going to need certification at Beis, and you could always do that. So a document by itself could always be challenged. The authenticity of it can always be challenged until there's a process of kiyum shtaras. But that being said, in a general sense, assuming that everybody agrees with the transaction, possession of a document is enough to entitle you for collection. There's not an automatic secondary level of certification that is necessary in accordance with Rava. Okay. Fine. Let's go back there. Says Imar, Nimsa la'echad ben shtarosav, shtaros shel Yosef ben Shimon parua, shtaros shneihen paruin. So what's the interesting case over here? So what happens? So let's say again, you have a same scenario of a city with two Yosef ben Shimons. There's a lender, right? There's a lender, and the lender finds a document, and what happens? And it says that the document of Yosef ben Shimon, the loan of Yosef ben Shimon, has been repaid. So halacha l'maisa, let's say he had lent money to both Yosef ben Shimons. What's the halacha? He can't collect from either of them. Can't collect from either of them. Now, I want to point out, by the way, as we're going to see, actually none of these cases are a chiddush, because the truth is they all operate based on one simple principle, which has been our guiding light, really our guiding light for all of Bava Basra, Bava Metzia, Bava Kama, which is good. I was expecting like a little bit more of a resounding answer to that one, but yes, good, right? Right? Okay, good. Right? So right? That's, remember again, that's in general. So therefore, that's always the principle that's at play over here. When you want to collect, the burden of proof is always upon the extractor. So in this case over here, I find a receipt, essentially amongst my paperwork. And the receipt says that the loan of Yosef ben Shimon has been repaid. I lent to both Yosef ben Shimon. So both says, just play this out. I show up in Yosef ben Shimon, number one, and say, okay, time to pay your debt. What is he going to say? Let's say, not me. I'm the guy you have in the shover, in the receipt. You go to the second one. So obviously, again, if I could prove who did or who didn't pay, then halacha l'maisa I could collect. But based on the inability to pay, then halacha l'maisa both of them are considered to be paid up. So the Gemara says, "Taima de nimsa, halo nimsa, matzi mapik." So we'll say, so now the reason, ultimately, again, this is true, is because I found this receipt. If you look at the Rashbam. The Rashbam says, sorry. So time to nimsa, halo nimsa, matzi mapik, vanan, v'lo acher yochol lahotzi alein. But one second, but I don't understand how this is happening. The Mishnah said that if you have two Yosef ben Shimons who live in a city, you're not allowed to lend either of them money, dafka, because of the transactional confusion that could ensue. To which the Gemara says, sorry. Oh, no. Both say, remember again, if you have two Yosef and Shimons who live in the same city, you can lend them money. How do you lend them money? How do you lend them money? If you attack on another third generation. In other words, the assumption is that even if you have two guys named Yosef ben Shimon, but Pashtus what? They're not going to have the same Zeda, right? The name of the same Zeda. That's what we're assuming. So again, you put in the third generation. So the Gemara says, so if that's the case, let's look on the receipt. Let's look on the receipt, right? Because one is Yosef ben Shimon ben Yitzchak, and one is Yosef ben Shimon ben Avram. So that's how you're able to lend the money. Let's see whose name is on the receipt. To which the Gemara says, no, Amravoshia b'mishloshin b'shtar ve'mishloshin b'shover. Oh, okay. So I will say, so the Maisa, where they put in a third generation on the loan document, that enabled the loan of money, but they did not put a third generation, on the receipt. Okay, so the Gemara says as follows: Abaye says, "Achi kamar nimsa lelove ben shtarosav shtaro shal Yosef ben Shimon alai parua shtaro shnei parua." So Abaye says like this: it's actually the following case: if the borrower found amongst his shtaros that the shtar of Yosef ben Shimon is paid, ultimately, again, both documents are considered to be paid. If you take a look at the Rashbam says over here, sorry. The Rasham says, Abai Amar, first wide line, Abai Amar, Masnisin Kishinim Tzuba Beis Lovamari. So Abai says, no. The Mishnah is talking about a case where the documents are found not with the lender, but the documents are found with the borrower. So the Gemara says, V'hachi katani, this is what it means to say, Nimsa lelova echad bein shtaros of shover, shashtar shahayano shebo Yosef ben Shimon Paruahu, v'hayu shnei Yosef ben Shimon no shimbo. So we'll say it's the reverse case. The reverse case is the document wasn't found with the lender, the document was found with the borrower. The borrower had borrowed money from two Yosef ben Shimons. So he has amongst his documents a receipt that says, I paid back Yosef ben Shimon. Only one problem, which is what? It doesn't say which one. So we'll say it's the same principle. So now what does he have to do? Who does he have to repay? The answer is neither. Right? Why? Hamotzi mechaber alav haraya. Ultimately, again, whoever thinks that they're entitled to, in other words, he knows he paid one, he doesn't know which one he paid, so whichever one feels that he's the one who's unpaid is going to have an obligation to prove that he's been unpaid, and therefore, halacha l'maisa, okay, incredible. So Mar goes weiter. Ketza yasa yashlishu. So we'll say, so therefore the Mishnah gave a simple eitzah, which is a very intuitive eitzah, which is that halacha l'maisa, if you live in a city where there are two Yosef ben Shimons, and indeed you want to lend money to them, or they want to lend money to each other. So what happens? Oh, Matt, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you very much, Matt. Thank you. So what happens if halacha l'maisa, you do live in a city, and what? And you want to lend to Yosef ben Shimon's money, right? Or they want to lend each other. So what do? It's not a problem. All you need to do is add on a third generation. So Yosef ben Shimon ben Yitzchak, Yosef ben Shimon Avram, and that differentiates them enough that then we could engage ultimately again in them borrowing or lending money. So Tana, this is interesting. The other possibility about say what you could do is what? If one of them is a Kohen, and one of them is a Levi, right? So you can differentiate it in that way as well. Tana im hayu shneim kohanim yichtavu doro. So we'll say it's interesting. So the Gemara seems to be indicating to us that the ideal first is before you get into a third generation, let's engage in tribal differentiation, right? So tribal differentiation, Yosef ben Shimon HaKohen, Yosef ben Shimon HaLevi. Okay, so assuming that differentiates them, that's fine. If that doesn't work, then you go up a generation as well. Beautiful. Mishnah. Homer libno shtar ben shtarosei parov ve'eniyadua ezuhu. So this is an interesting case, right? So you have a case of a father who says to his son. Now, the way that the Rashbam highlights this case is mitzave b'shas misaso. So we'll call him father. We'll just call him father. Father is dying. He says to his son that halacha l'maisa, one of the loan documents that I have. So a father lent money to a bunch of people, and he says to his son, one of the people who I lent money to paid back his debt. Ve'eni yodea ezu, and I don't know which one paid me back. What's the halacha? Shtaros kulan peruin. All the debts are considered to be repaid. Now take a look at the Rashbam. This is actually a very beautiful Mishnah. The Mishnah says, both I'm in the Rashbam. Look at this inside. This is 6 lines up from the bottom. So we'll say, so now, here's what's interesting. Now generally, what would happen in a case like this, right? I lend Ruvain money. Ruvain pays me back. What happens? Right? I give him back the document. Right? Or we tear up the document. What's interesting to note in this case over here is the father's telling his son, one of the debtors paid me back, but he trusted me. He didn't make me return the loan document. He trusted me. So I have all of these loan documents. People owe me money. I know that someone paid me back. I don't know who. Now look at the Rashbam. The Rashbam says, right, and when I go to the world to come, when I die, and I stand before the Kisei Beis Din Shel Ma'ala, I do not want to be punished ultimately again for any type of financial misdeeds. You will say, it's incredible, right? What's fascinating about this is, this could have been a situation, by the way, that father had outstanding for a very long time. But what happened? Nothing makes you get your affairs in order like death. See, a lot of times in life, we're willing to live in the gray. Right? We're willing to live with a lot of ambiguity. We're willing to live with a lot of inconsistencies. Why? Because in the back of our mind, we figure to ourselves, there's plenty of time to get it worked out. Plenty of time to get it worked out. I know I want to get it worked out, plenty of time. So we live with all of this gray, all this inconsistency, all this ambiguity. Nothing forces a person to get their affairs in order like death. When the person, the Chazal tell us that Yaakov Avinu davened for illness. He said, before Yaakov Avinu, what would happen? How would people die? They would sneeze. They would sneeze, right? That's why, again, that's why there was B'tamim and Hagim brings down that there is a custom to say l'chaim to someone after they sneeze. Right? Because that's what happened. Same HaKadosh Baruch Hu breathed life through the nostrils, people would sneeze and they would die. They would die. Yaakov Avinu davened for illness because a person should know that the end is near and they can get their affairs in order. So it's really the goal of saying, that's the Gemara Maseches Brachos says. Brachos says that if a person is having a difficult time with controlling their Yetzer Hara, so if all else fails, what does the Gemara say? Yaskir lo yom hamisa. Remind yourself you're going to die. I'm going to die. So at the end of the day, if I'm going to do this Aveira, I'm going to have to give an explanation for why I did this. In life, you can explain away everything. After 120, I stand before the Beis Din Shalmala, and I have to give an accounting of my life. There's no explanations, right? There's no alternative ideologies. There's no but. There's nothing. There's just MS. And there's sheker. That's all there is. One of two options. So really, the whole yesod of successful living, like there's, what's the expression? Live life like you're going to die, something like that? Like live, what is it? Live today as if it's your last day. And, that's a Ma'amar Chazal. That's a Ma'amar Chazal. That is absolutely correct. Whatever. There's whatever. Point over here is right. I'm just going to make something up, right? Point over here, as I will say, is if a person lives life recognizing that they're facing imminent death, possible imminent death in any moment. I know that sounds like a little bit like a downer, but it's not. Because imagine, by the way, like in this case over here, imagine just how different life is lived if I recognize that at any given moment it'll end. See, people usually take a statement like that and they use like in a hedonistic way. Oh, let me enjoy everything, right? Let me experience everything. What's about in a hashkafic way? That I can't leave anything undone. I can't leave any ambiguities. I don't want any gray in my life. At the end of the day, if I was taken from this world right now, I want to be able to stand behind the decisions I have made, and I want to be able to be confident in the way that I'm living in this current moment. No ambiguities, no gray, no inconsistencies. Yeah, do I have plenty of averas that I have to account for? Absolutely, unequivocally. But I don't want any ambiguities or inconsistencies. Let me get those things worked out right now. So a father is facing death. He says to his son, listen, I know that one of these debts has been repaid and I don't know which one. What's the halacha? Shtaros kulin peruin. All of the debts are considered to be paid. Now again, I both say, so it's not a chiddush, right? Once again, it's motzi mechaver alav arhaya. So remember again, every single possible debtor may be the one who repaid the debt. So therefore, the son doesn't really have the power to extract money from all of them. They're all considered to be paid. By the way, I want to point out, they're all considered to be paid from the perspective of the malva. When you borrow money, there's an absolute biblical obligation to repay that which you borrowed. So when we say they're considered to be paid, that's klape the malva, right? As the lender doesn't have the ability to get back any of this money. The borrowers absolutely have a halachic and a moral obligation to pay back the money that they borrowed. Nimtza la'echad sham. Nimtza la'echad sham shnayim. So we'll say, now let's say again, in this case, father had lent Ruvain, right? Father had lent Ruvain 2 sums of money. A large sum and a small sum. So now father is telling his son, one of my outstanding debts is forgiven, but I don't know which one. Hagadol parua v'katan eina parua. So there's an interesting exception. If father had lent 2 sums of money to the same borrower, the same borrower, one a large amount, one a small amount, and father says to his son, one of my loans has been paid, we assume it was the larger of the two to Ruvain, but the smaller one is still outstanding. Incredible. Gemara, Amar Rava, shtar lecha biyadi parua. So in general, if a person says, right, a lender says to a borrower, right, and again, talking about a case where a lender lent two sums of money to a borrower, and he says, shtar lecha biyadi parua. The shtar that I have, right, that is paid, debt is already paid. Hagadol parua v'katan eina parua. We assume, if you look at the Rashbam says, chov lecha biyadi, mashma masha'at, sorry, not yet, right? So Ruvain lent to Shimon two sums of money, a large sum and a small sum. Ruvain says to Shimon, by the way, your debt is paid. Your chov, shtar chov lecha biyadi, that loan document that you have with me is paid. Now he doesn't articulate which one is paid. We assume which is paid, the larger one, and the smaller one is still outstanding. Chov lecha biyadi parua, but if Ruvain uses a different lashon, and Ruvain says, Shimon, your debts, chov, your debt, I should say your debt singular, is paid, then what? Shtaros kulan peruin. We assume all the loans are paid. You hear the difference in Lashonos? In case number one, it was shtar lecha biyadi. One of the shtaros you have with me, is paid. So in a case like that, halacha l'maisa, we assume the larger of the debts is paid, the smaller one is still outstanding. If he says chov, which is a more all-encompassing statement, your debt, then everything is paid. So the Gemara says, Amarli Ravina l'Rava, 1 second. Elameata, sadai mechur lecha. So let's say again, Reuven says to Shimon, my field is sold to you, without articulating which field. Sadai gidola mechur lo. Sadai mechur lo. Sadai gidola mechur lo. We assume that Reuven sold his larger field to Shimon. Sadai sheyeshli mechur lecha. But if Reuven says, the field that I have is sold to you, would we say, kol sadosa mechur lo? Would we say that Reuven is selling all of his fields? In other words, this would be the opposite of the debt case, to which the Gemara says, no. Hasam yad bal hashtar ala tachtona. So we'll say, so again, which is another way of saying, hamotzi mechavera alav haraya. So right, in the case ultimately, again, where Reuven says to Shimon, Shimon has two debts due to Reuven, a large one and a small one, and Reuven says, your shtarchov, your loan document is forgiven. So we assume ultimately, again, that that's referring to the larger debt. And again, and if it's not, the burden of proof is going to be upon Reuven to prove that he could collect a larger debt. In the case of the field, where Reuven sells Shimon a field, so the default ultimately is that he's selling one field, not that he's selling all the fields. And if Shimon wants to prove that he bought all of the fields, then the burden of proof is upon him. Incredible. I will say we now come to the sugya of Arif, a really incredible sugya. Hamalves chavera al yidei Arif. A very interesting case, right? What happens? I lend Shimon money, and Reuven is a guarantor. Now we're going to talk about different types of guarantors over the course of this sugya. You cannot collect payment from the arif. I will say now, that statement at first glance seems totally illogical. I'm lending money with a guarantor, but I can never collect money from the guarantor. The Gemara is going to challenge that statement in just a moment. Amar Beis, v'im amar amanas she'efra mimi she'ertza yifra mina arif. Now this is very interesting. We're going to see that there are different ways to structure guarantor transactions. If I lend Shimon money, and Reuven is the guarantor, and the way I structure this debt is to say, Shimon, I'm lending you the money, but I have the right to collect from whoever I want. So if I want to collect from Shimon, I can collect from Shimon. I want to go right to guarantor, I could collect from guarantor. Rabbi Shmuel says, Im yesh nechasim lelova ben kachu ben kach lo yifra mina arei. Rabbi Shmuel says, no. The only time you could ever go to a guarantor is when the borrower does not have money. But if the borrower has money, you never have a right to go to the guarantor. So we'll say, which we'll get to in the Gemara. This is an interesting case. So we'll say, let's say I guaranteed a ksuva. Reuven's married to Rachel. I guaranteed Rachel's ksuva. Now, what does that mean to guarantee Rachel's ksuva? What does that mean? What that means is that in the event of death or divorce, if it turns out that Reuven doesn't have any money, I tell Rachel, I got you, right? I'll pay your ksuva. So I'll say this is a great case. V'haya baila magarsha. So now what happens? Reuven and Rachel are getting divorced. So watch this. Yidirena hana. So we'll say, so I have a right to demand that Reuven has to take a neder, right, prohibiting Rachel from getting any benefit from him. And this is a neder, Rashbam points out over here, what we call a neder shehudr al das rabim. We'll get more into this. A public neder. Now I will say now, a public neder is irrevocable. Irrevocable. So I could force Ruvain to make an irrevocable neder that Rachel can't get any benefit from him. Now what does that neder effectively do? What does it do? What does it do? It prevents them from ever getting remarried. Because what are we concerned about over here? Listen to this. This is great. It's actually a great scheme. So the Gemara says, what are we concerned about? Shema yasu kinunya al mechasim shalzeh v'yachzir ishto. This is great. What are we concerned about? Ruvain and Rachel are on some fallen on some financially hard times. Now Ruvain knows that I guaranteed Rachel's ksuva. So Ruvain says to Rachel like this, right? Right now I don't have any money, so I have a great idea. Let's get divorced, right? Let's get divorced. You'll be able to collect your ksuva. Silber is guaranteeing your ksuva. He'll pay you out the ksuva, and then guess what? Guess what? Baruch Hashem, we just paid for our honeymoon, right? We just, right? We'll get back together, we'll reconcile, whatever, we'll go through a couple of sessions, we'll go, right? Therapy will make it look like, right? We'll make it look like legitimate, and then Amir Hashem, a small chuppah, small chasana, and Baruch Hashem, now we have a beautiful nest egg. So in order to prevent this type of exploitation, so what happens? Rabbi Shmuel says, if there is a guarantor for the ksuva, before the ksuva is paid out, ex-husband has to make a neder that his ex-wife is never permitted to get hanoah from him, which effectively would preclude them from ever getting remarried. After that neder is made, then the arev could be made obligated to go ahead and pay out the ksuva. Incredible, incredible. Says the Gemara. So my taima. So we'll say what is the, now again, what the Gemara is bothered by is the Mishnah statement. What was the Mishnah statement? That if you have a guarantor for a loan, right? So I'm lending Shimon money. Reuven is the guarantor. So the Mishnah made this strange statement that you can't collect payment from the guarantor. The Gemara says, what does that mean? My taima. Rabbi Yosef Dami Tarvayu Gavra Ashlimasli Gavra Ashlimachlach. So we'll say Rabbi Yosef feel what the Mishnah is teaching is like this. What is the job of a guarantor? This is interesting about saying. So we're going to see there is a fundamental machlokes job of the guarantor. Some say, there's a school of thought that says, the job of the guarantor is to make sure that the borrower is available and present for repayment. In other words, he guarantees that the borrower will be here for repayment. But what doesn't he guarantee? What doesn't he guarantee? Payment. In other words, so the guarantor says, listen, you right, Silber, you got me into this. So Reuven says, right, I lent money to Shimon. Reuven's the guarantor. What's Reuven's obligation? Reuven's obligation is to make sure that Shimon doesn't flee the country, right? So Reuven says, right, you told me to guarantee Reuven. I guaranteed Reuven. Here he is. I'm not giving you a cent, but the borrower is here. Get your money from him. Okay. That's Persian law. That's Persian law, right? That's not. I was going to say regular person law, but I would be an offense. Right? That's not. Right? That's Persian law, right? That's what the Parsom. That's what the Persians do. So the Gemara says, Adraba, Basra. So the Gemara says, Adraba, Basra Arvazi. That's not true, by the way. Persian law actually says that you can always go after the guarantor. Right? So that's not true. Rather, what does it mean when it says this Persian law? Ella beidina de parsoi de lo yavi taimel milsayu. So this is interesting. So apparently the way that the Persians worked was when a Persian court gave a ruling, they did not have to provide any reasoning to their ruling. So they would just go ahead and give a ruling, and that was it. That was it. So the Gemara says, you're making this like a Persian court over here. That doesn't make any sense. In other words, where are you coming up with this idea that a guarantor is just obligated to furnish the borrower, and that's it? That's all he has to do? He doesn't have any other financial obligation in this? Ella Amrav Nachaman, Mailu Yiparim in Arev. No. So Rav Nachman says, no. What does the Mishnah say when the Mishnah says you can't extract payments from the guarantor? What does that mean? Lo Yitba Arev Tchila. Oh, no. What I mean to say is like this. If I go ahead and I lend Shimon money, and I make Reuven the guarantor, when the debt comes due, I first have to try to collect payments from who? From Shimon the borrower. And only in the event of default of the borrower, only then do I have the right to go to the guarantor. So when the Mishnah says that if you lend money with a guarantor, you can't collect from the guarantor, means you can't collect from the guarantor first. He can't be your first stop of repayment. You have to first go to the borrower, and only in the event that the borrower can't repay, then and only then can you go to the guarantor. That supports this. If you lend your friend money, I lend Shimon money with a guarantor. Lo yitba arev tchila. You can't go to the guarantor first for repayment. V'em amar amanash she'arfa mishayirtza. Excuse me, she'artza yitba arev tchila. Now, there is an exception to this. What's the exception? You could structure a transaction in a way that you're allowed to go to the guarantor first. Now, we'll say, here's what there is, essentially, and we see this all the time in transactional law. Transactional law, every transaction always has a default setting. So therefore, again, if I lend Shimon money and Reuven is the guarantor, what is the default setting on a guarantor situation? What's the default? What's the default? You can only go to the guarantor when? When? After the borrower can't pay. Right? My first stop is always going to be the borrower. Only after the borrower can't pay, then I could go to the guarantor. However, can you structure a transaction differently? Of course. So when I go ahead and I lend Shimon money, and I say, Reuven, you're going to be the guarantor. But again, Chavra, I, the lender, am entering into this transaction with the right to collect from whoever I want mitchila. So I feel like going to Shimon, I'll go to Shimon. I feel like going to Reuven, I'm going to go to Reuven. If now again, obviously, the guarantor has to agree to that, right? In other words, he's only a party to the transaction. So, but assuming that he agrees to that, that transaction ultimately will work as well. So both say this is very important. This is Arvus 101, right? This is guarantorship. Guarantorkeit, right? 101. This is how it works. The default is guarantor can only be called into action. Ultimately, again, if the borrower defaults. But halacha l'maisa, again, unless you structure it otherwise. Well, so I'll just point out, I said over this vart in the virtual drasha this past week, just quickly. The Hazam Rav Suratskin says so beautifully. He says Yaakov Avinu prepared himself for three things when he encountered Esav: milchama, war; tefillah, prayer; and daran, gift. And Rav Suratskin asks, he says, I don't understand, why didn't Yaakov daven first? Shouldn't tefillah come before everything? And Rav Suratskin gives a beautiful answer. He explains, it's not the way it works. He says, often in times of crisis, our reflexive reaction is to look upward. He says, that's not the first stop. The first stop in times of crisis is to look inward. What can I do about my circumstances? Before you ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu for help, before you start leaning on Hashem for everything, the first shayla Yid has to ask himself is, what can I do? So the first thing Yaakov Avinu does in life is not daven. It's not the first thing. The first thing he does is he prepares for war. He prepares for war. The first step in the midst of difficult life situations is not looking upward, it's looking inward. So we'll say, it's such a sort of life. And by the way, that's the Musar Haskell in this also. If you think about this, we'll say. So, the Ribono Shalom is the lender, right? And we are the borrower. We're the borrower, and there's a guarantor, right? There are many different types of guarantors in life. The truth is really the Ribono Shalom is both the lender and the guarantor for us, but I'm the borrower. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I'm lending you a whole bunch of stuff. I'm lending you your health. I'm lending you your parnasa. I'm lending you your family. I'm lending you your kohos. I'm lending all of these things. And the debt comes due. The debt comes due. How does the debt come due? HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I don't mean not death. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I'm giving you all of these things. I want to see what is my return on investment. And just understand the first place that the lender comes is to the borrower. Every single day I have to give an accounting to the Ribono Shalom about how I'm using the borrowed funds. Each and every day I have to give an accounting to the lender. And I will say, by the way, it applies on Sundays also. It's not just Monday through Friday, right? It applies literally, again, every day of the week. And again, what time is the football game today? What time? Good, excellent, right answer, right? I was saying, just understand, if there's going to be hours of time allocated to just mindless engagement with overpaid men in tight pants, just understand, you got to account for it. Now again, there is a way, I'll be malamed tzchasana, there is a way to account for it. Everyone needs to relax, right? Everyone needs downtime, and that's fine. So if that's strangely somehow how you want your downtime, right? Then that's fine. That's fine. In other words, but just know what it is. Just account for it in your mind. It can't be accounted as football. It can be accounted as, I'm a human being, I need time to recharge, I need time to relax. This is my recharging time. Fantastic. Again, I don't know that that's the best way to use your recharging time, but that's between you and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? So just choose wisely. Right? But Lamaisa, that's your recharge time. That's it. So that's as long as you are accounting for how you're using the borrowed money, how you're using, so to speak, the borrowed resources. Because understand, the lender comes right to the lova. Right? The guarantor only gets involved much later on. The first way the transaction works is, Kadosh Baruch Hu lent me a whole bunch of stuff. I'm the borrower. The borrower is the first stop in collection. The borrower is the first stop in accounting. Incredible. Let's go back to Amar Rav Huna. Let's finish up with this. Amar Rav Huna. Minayin lo'arev dimishtabit. So we'll say, now, interestingly enough, the Gemara says, by the way, from where do you know that an arev, that a guarantor, is encumbered? In other words, from where do we know halachically this concept of guarantorship? So the Gemara says, Dichsiv is incredible. Anochi erevenu miadi tivakshenu. We'll say not this week's parsha, but next week's parsha. Incredible. This is by Yehuda. This is by Yehuda and Binyamin, right? Remember again, this is when they have to go back to Egypt, right? They have to go back to Egypt. The only way Yosef, remember, they don't know who Yosef is. They think he's just, some unpredictable, despotic ruler. They don't know who he is, right? So Lamais, again, what does Yehuda say to Yaakov? Yosef won't give us food unless, of course, we go ahead and we bring Binyamin. And of course, Yaakov Avinu doesn't want to let Binyamin out of his sight because it's the only remaining son of Rachel Imenu that he has. He saw, or he thinks he knows what happened to Yosef, and so Yehuda says to Yaakov, "Anochi erevenu miadi tivakshenu." I will be the arev. I will be the arev, and because I am the arev, ultimately, again, if something happens, you come to me. Something happens, you come to me. So the Gemara says, no. This is not a good raya. Why not? Maskef Rav Chisda hakablonosu dechsev tenei oso al yadi v'ani ashivenu. So as we're going to talk about this, there is a higher level of guarantorship, of being an arev, and that's called a kablonos, a kablon. Now again, so the Gemara says that's a different discussion. And you can see it, by the way, even in the psukim here. So Yehuda is so much more than just a guarantor, right? Yehuda is taking complete and absolute responsibility. So the Gemara says that's not the arev we're talking about over here in the Mishnah. That's what we call a kablonos. Keep that in the back of your mind. We're going to circle back to that. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Mehacha. Here's where it comes from. So the Gemara quotes actually a very, very beautiful pasuk from Mishlei. Lokach bigdo ki arev zar. Uba'ad nochriya chavlehu. So literally again, take his clothing, right? Take his garment. Ki arev zar, because he guaranteed on behalf of a strange person. Va'omer, or a stranger, not a strange person, a stranger. Va'omer, furthermore again, the pasuk goes on both sides. So again, this is all from Mishlei. Va'omer, bini. We'll explain what these psukim mean in just a moment. Let's read it first. Bini, imarafta l're'acha, takat l'zar kapecha, nokashta b'nei picha. So literally translated, my son, if you have become a guarantor for your friend, takata l'zar kapecha, literally you've outstretched your hand to a stranger, nokashta b'imrei picha, you've stumbled over your words, nokadata b'imrei picha, you've been ensnared in the utterances of your mouth, aseh zos efa b'ni v'hi natzel. Do this, my son, and be saved. Ki basa bekaf re'echa, lech hisrapes v'rahav re'echa. Okay, so what does this mean? Here we go. So the Gemara says, Imamon yesh lecha biyadecha, if you have money in your hand, hater lo pisas yad. So we'll say, so the Gemara learns out from this, the din of Kablon. If you have money in your hand, then ultimately, again, if you are the Kablon, then go and pay on behalf of the borrower. So that's the Lashon over here. Ki basa bekaf re'echa, lech visrapes v'rahav re'echa. If you have money, in other words, if the borrower defaulted on the loan, and you have money, you're the Kablon, you could repay, then repay on his behalf. Ve'imlav harbe alav re'im. But if you're not a guarantor, you haven't done something, you don't owe someone money, but you've offended them. You've hurt them, then hirba alav re'im, which means bring a lot of people to this person and try to reconcile. Okay, so we'll say, so again, it's interesting, I just want to point out, it's interesting to note that the Gemara does not bring a biblical proof for arev, right? I mean, it does, it brings Yehuda, but then it says that's not really a real din of arev. ultimately, again, that's kablanos. It's interesting that the raya for Arev is coming from Mishlei. So we'll say, just understand, to be honest, you don't really need a biblical proof, right, for the concept of arbas. In other words, this is just a transactional reality that people enter into these transactions. And Reuven, in our case, where I lend Shimon money, Reuven has every right to go ahead and just be an arev if he wants to. Okay, but it's in a smachta. We're bringing, a scriptural allusion to this. So the Gemara goes weiter. Let's finish up. So we're finishing now. So the Gemara says, Amar Meimar, Arev de Mishtab Mechalkis Rabbi Huda Rabbi Yossi. So we'll say the fact that an Arev could ultimately again become encumbered can be Mishtabed as a Machlokis. Rabbi Yossi don't asmachta kanya Arev Mishtabed. So this is very interesting. So the Gemara wants to make this about asmachta. But remember again, asmachta, we had this. What's asmachta? Do hyperbolic statements create binding halachic realities? So both say, so let's play this out, right? I lend money to Shimon. I lend $1,000 to Shimon, right? So Reuven says, okay, I'll be the Arev. So both say, it's interesting. The Gemara says, what's going through Reuven's mind when he becomes the guarantor? What's going through his mind? It's not going to happen, right? Reuven's going to be fine. He's going to pay back. But this is just like a shtempel. It's good. It's chizik. It's avas chinam. It's beautiful. It's fantastic, right? But I'm not going to. I have no intentions of having to actually pay back silver because Reuven's got this. So essentially, the commitment of an arev is an asmachta. So watch this. Rabbi Yossi damar asmachta kanya arev mishtabed. So current Rabbi Yossi holds asmachta kanya. That's when an arev is obligated. Rabbi Huda damar asmachta lo kanya arev lo mishtabed. But according to Rabbi Huda says asmachta lo kanya, then ultimately again an arev is not obligated. 1 second. It's not true. But let's say we paskin asmachta lo kanya. We paskin that hyperbolic statements do not create halachic realities. But yet what? We do hold that there's a concept of an arev, of a guarantor. So how do you reconcile that? Rashi both says incredible. Bahu hana. So what the Gemara is asking is as follows. In general, what is it? What the Gemara is really asking is, what is it that makes a guarantor obligated? See, I both say normally, how do you create the obligation? Kinyan, right? I can be makabel kinyan and guarantee myself things. So, for example, right? When a man gets married, he has to take upon himself the obligations as outlined in the ksuva. How does he do that? Right? If you got married, you've done this, right? Well, I'm against money. What were you doing? What were you doing at the chassan stish? And they'll say, so right, what do? You do kabbalas kinyan, right? The chassan picks up a pen, picks up a handkerchief, something. That kinyan obligates him in the obligations of the ksuva. Because again, in general, in halacha, if you're going to become really obligated to something, there has to be a ma'aseh kinyan. So really what the Gemara is asking over here is, okay, so now I have a scriptural proof, so to speak, for the concept of an arev. But what obligates an arev? I'm lending $1,000 to Shimon. Reuven says he's the guarantor. Well, what guarantee? Right? What obligates him in that guarantorship? Right? There's no. If we do a kinyan, great. Which, by the way, you definitely can do. Right? We could do a kinyan together. Me, Reuven, and Shimon. We could do that. But in the absence of a kinyan, what obligates him? The Boss says incredible. You know what obligates him? The Gemara says Bahi hana, from the hana that he gets to come a hemenlei, that he is believed. What does that mean? And I will say, what's the incredible thing about this case? I'm lending Reuven $1,000, and Shimon is guaranteeing. So what's the chap over here, right? Why, at the end of the day, why am I lending Reuven the money? Why am I lending him the money? Let's boil this down. Why am I lending Reuven the money? Why? This is the worst group of businessmen ever. Right? Why am I lending Reuven the money? I will say, why? Because I believe in Shimon. Remember, if I believed in Reuven, then what? I don't need a guarantor. The only whenever you have a guarantor, I'll say guarantor by definition means I am not 100% sure that the borrower is going to come through. Otherwise, if I believe in the borrower, then I don't need the guarantor. If there's a guarantor, essentially what I'm saying is, who do I really believe in this entire transaction? The guarantor. That's really who I believe in. So let's listen to this. Shimon feels so honored by the fact that I'm willing to commit transactionally based on his participation. That hana that he has, that I believe in him, is what commits him to the guarantorship. That hana that he has, knowing that I am only lending to Ruvain based on his guarantor, or Shimon, sorry, I'm only lending to Shimon based on his guarantorship. That's what generates his halachic commitment to this transaction. Absolutely incredible. So that's the mechanics. And I'll say, but you see something incredibly amazing. What's the greatest thing you could do for someone in life? The greatest thing you could do for them is believe in them. When you believe in someone, and they know that you believe in them, right? When you go, right? We all know this, because hopefully we all have someone in this world who believes in us. That knowledge that someone believes in me gives me the chizuk and gives me the strength to move forward, to accomplish, to do, and when I fall, to pick myself up. Why is the Arev willing to commit to this transaction? Because he's so honored by the fact that the lender believes in him to such a degree that he's willing to commit himself financially to this transaction. The greatest gift that you could give to another person is that they know that you believe in them. That knowledge, the ability to go through life knowing that there's someone who believes in me, gives me the tremendous chizuk to accomplish anything and everything. I will say, stop over for today. Shkoyach. All right, Chavran Zoom, have a great day, everyone.